Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, North Korea threatens to walk away. The regime cancels talks with the South and says it will reconsider a historic summit with the U.S. in protest of joint military exercises and top U.S. demands. Then an inside look into Trump Tower. The Senate releases transcripts of its interviews with the president's son and others about a controversial meeting with a Russian lawyer. And our series on junk news continues, the battle inside Facebook to combat the spread of misinformation while keeping an open forum of ideas.
We believe that we're not arbiters of truth and that people don't want us to be arbiters of truth. And we also believe that censoring and fully removing information unless it violates our community standards is not the expectation from our community.
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. What seemed like a pretty good bet a week ago, a meeting between North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un and President Trump set for June 12th in Singapore is now up in the air. A top North Korean official released a statement late yesterday saying if the United States insists on complete nuclear disarmament, the North Koreans are not interested in talking with Mr. Trump.
We haven't seen anything. We haven't heard anything. We will see what happens.
President Trump responded to North Korean threats to cancel the June 12th summit with leader Kim Jong-un if the U.S. continued to push Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear weapons.
Will you still insist on denuclearization of the North Korean peninsula?
In the pre-dawn hours, Pyongyang upset months of thawing relations. First, it abruptly suspended high-level talks with Seoul in protest of a joint U.S.-South Korea military exercise called Max Thunder.
The South Korean authorities lost all senses, should be held wholly accountable for the scuttled North-South high-level talks.
Then a warning for the U.S. about another consequence of that annual drill.
The United States will also have to undertake careful deliberations about the fate of the planned North Korea-U.S. summit.
Hours later, state media carried a statement from North Korea's first vice foreign minister, Kim Kye-gwan, that rejected any notion of total disarmament. He said, quote, "If the U.S. is trying to drive us into a corner to force our unilateral nuclear abandonment, we will no longer be interested in such dialogue." Before Mr. Trump spoke, Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the White House is still hopeful the meeting will take place.
Look, this is something that we fully expected. The president is very used and ready for tough negotiations, and if they want to meet, we'll be ready, and if they don't, that's okay too. And we'll continue with the campaign of maximum pressure if that's the case.
The North Korean statement also criticized Mr. Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton. Last month, Bolton invoked Libya's 2003 disarmament as a model for North Korea and pushed for irreversible dismantlement before the lifting of sanctions.
We have very much in mind the Libya model from 2003, 2004.
Then Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi was overthrown and killed in 2011 by rebels with U.S. backing. Kim said it was an awfully sinister move to demand Pyongyang do the same. At the White House, Sanders seemed to back away from Bolton's comment.
I'm not aware that that's a model that we're using. Look, again, this is the President Trump model.
This follows in the span of a few weeks, President Trump shifting from outright optimism
I think that we're going to have a success.
to occasional caution.
If it's not going to be fair and reasonable and good, I will, unlike past administrations, I will leave the table.
For their part, China's President Xi Jinping met with North Korea's ruling Workers' Party officials and urged Pyongyang not to cancel next month's summit. In the day's other news, President Trump's choice to lead the Central Intelligence Agency, Gina Haspel, moved one step closer to confirmation. The Senate Intelligence Committee voted 10-5 behind closed doors to approve her nomination. Democratic Senators Mark Warner and Joe Manchin added their support to the 8 Republicans already backing Haspel. She's come under criticism for her role in the CIA's harsh interrogation techniques of terrorism suspects. A full Senate vote could come as early as this week. A new footnote has been added to President Trump's financial disclosure report from last year. This is a filing required by the Office of Government Ethics. What's new is a reimbursement in an amount ranging from $100,000 to $250,000 for his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. In the weeks before the 2016 election, Cohen paid $130,000 to adult film actress Stephanie Clifford to keep her quiet about an alleged affair with Mr. Trump. The president denies the allegation. President Trump may have modified his calls to ease sanctions against the giant Chinese telecom company, ZTE. Mr. Trump had tweeted on Sunday that he had ordered the U.S. Commerce Department to give the company a way to get back into business fast. Today, Mr. Trump wrote that nothing has happened with ZTE except as it pertains to the larger trade deal. But FBI Director Christopher Wray separately told senators today that he is deeply concerned about the Chinese company gaining ground in the U.S. because it gives them the capacity to conduct undetected espionage. European Council leader Donald Tusk had harsh words for President Trump today and what Tusk called his capricious policies. European leaders are scrambling to keep Iran in the multi-nation nuclear agreement now that the U.S. has withdrawn. At an EU summit in Bulgaria, Tusk rebuffed warnings from the U.S. that it may sanction EU countries for doing business with Iran.
Looking at the latest decisions of President Trump, someone could even think, with friends like that, who needs enemies? He has made us realize that if you need a helping hand, you will find one at the end of your arm.
Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said today that Tehran will not surrender to U.S. sanctions pressure. And an aide to Ayatollah Khamenei said that he doubts the deal can be salvaged. Back in this country, former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had a thinly veiled criticism of the president and a warning for Americans. Tillerson delivered the commencement address today at the Virginia Military Institute in Lexington. He said the country faces a growing crisis in ethics and integrity.
If our leaders seek to conceal the truth, or we as people become accepting of alternative realities that are no longer grounded in facts, then we as American citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom.
President Trump fired Tillerson as Secretary of State in March after the two had clashed over key foreign policy issues. The Senate voted to preserve so-called net neutrality rules today. 3 Republicans joined Democrats to pass the measure, reviving the Obama-era policy aimed at maintaining equal access to the Internet. The FCC under President Trump has rolled back those protections, saying they hamper innovation. The vote was largely symbolic, as the bill is expected to stall in the House. The whistleblower who uncovered Facebook's data mining scandal warned Congress today of a, quote, new Cold War online. Christopher Wiley, a former Cambridge Analytica employee, told a Senate panel that the firm used people's Facebook profiles to stoke paranoia and racial biases. The firm, which was employed by the Trump presidential campaign, has announced plans to close. In North Carolina, thousands of teachers flooded the state capitol, demanding better pay and protesting cutbacks. Educators marched through Raleigh as the Republican-controlled state legislature began its annual session. Classes were canceled in dozens of school districts. In several other states, like West Virginia and Oklahoma, similar protests want teachers more funding. And Michigan State University has reached a $500 million settlement with the women and girls abused by former gymnastics Dr. Larry Nassar. Over 300 of Nassar's victims sued the university for failing to protect them. Nassar is serving a decades-long prison sentence after pleading guilty to sexually assaulting patients while working at Michigan State. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 62 points to close at 24,769. The Nasdaq rose 46 points, and the S&P 500 was up 11. Still to come on the NewsHour, what North Korea is signaling ahead of a planned meeting with the U.S. The key takeaways from a slew of documents released in the Russia investigation, on the ground in the war-torn nation of Yemen, and much more. We return to the prospect of talks now in question between President Trump and Kim Jong-un of North Korea. For more on what the recent back and forth means, I'm joined by Joel Witt. He worked as part of the State Department team that negotiated a nuclear agreement with North Korea during the Clinton administration. He's now a senior fellow at the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University and founder of 38 North. It's a website that focuses on Korea. Joel Witt, thank you very much. Welcome back to the program. How do you read what North Korea is saying right now?
Well, there are a number of different ways to read it, but I think the main way to read it is that for months we've been used to North Korea essentially being a pussycat, which is very different from the way they've been in the past. And I think now they're reverting back to their past behavior in the run-up to the summit, and that means trying to heighten the pressure on the United States to give them a good deal. And by threatening to not go to the summit, that's their attempt to do that.
What precipitated this? Can you tell what was behind these statements?
Well, aside from the general North Korean attempt to play tough guy, which they normally do, there could have been a number of other things that were going on. One, it may reflect difficulties in secret preparatory talks that are leading up to the summit that I think are being held in Singapore.
These have been underway.
They've been underway because, as we all know, the leaders don't sit down at a summit and negotiate agreements by themselves. There's a lot of preparation ahead of time. So it could be a reflection of that. But secondly, it's also a reaction to some of the statements by Trump administration officials like John Bolton, which basically say to the North Koreans, you give up your nuclear weapons and then we'll reward you afterwards. And that's unacceptable to them.
So if Bolton's statement went too far, which as we reported earlier, the White House sounds like they're backing away from, they're saying we don't have a specific plan for what we think North Korea should do. But it does sound as if then there's room for the North Koreans to do something, to do some steps, some measure toward nuclear disarmament.
Well, that's exactly the case. That's what a negotiation is about. So what we're hearing are, at least from the United States, we're hearing the opening position, which is you give up everything, and then we'll give you something in return. And the North Korean position, which isn't public, but I'm pretty sure is, no, we'll gradually give up things, but you give us things in return during that process. So the issue is whether the two sides can meet somewhere in between that's acceptable to both.
So the Trump administration, the North Koreans are saying you need to do something about these joint exercises, the U.S. and South Korea. They're saying a couple things. The Trump administration has been saying we're not going to make any concessions. It's entirely up to the North. But in fact, are there steps that the U.S. and South Korea are going to need to seriously consider taking before there can be any deal?
Well, there are a lot of steps, because what the North Koreans are going to demand are, first, the normalization of relations with the United States, the establishment of diplomatic relations. Secondly, they're going to demand lifting of the sanctions. And the third step they're going to demand is a peace treaty. And all of these are big steps for the United States and South Korea to take. And the issue is whether we're willing to do that and get denuclearization in return.
Were you, before these statements happened in the last few days, or from the last 24 hours from North Korea, did you have a sense that things were moving in a positive direction?
You know, it's very difficult to say because most of us can only see what's going on in public, and there wasn't much going on at all except occasional public statements by the North Koreans in the United States. So it's hard to say whether things are moving in the right direction, and this could be the first sign that things aren't moving in the right direction, and so we need to watch very closely and see what happens from now to the summit.
What do you expect to happen next? I mean, who makes the next move?
You know, I'm not sure there are any more moves yet because these secret talks are underway. We'll see what happens in those, and there could be more back and forth publicly. But if we don't see an escalation of the current exchanges between President Trump and the North Koreans, then that means things are moving along in the right direction.
Do you have a gut instinct, Joel Witt, about whether this gets back on track or not?
You know, all along I've thought that there will be a summit, and a lot of people have been very skeptical about that. And my analysis is from the North Korean angle. I think they are very serious about having a meeting with President Trump and finding a way from confrontation to a peaceful path forward. The issue is, as I said earlier, whether we can make the two sides' positions come together in a way that's acceptable to both.
Joel Witt with the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins University. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tomorrow marks 1 year since former FBI Director Robert Mueller was named special counsel to investigate if the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia's attempts to sway the 2016 election. Tonight, Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani told the NewsHour that Mueller has said he will follow Department of Justice policy not to indict a sitting president. But the Mueller investigation continues, and it is not the only investigation into Russia and Trump campaign actions. Nick Schifrin begins with new documents released today about a pivotal moment.
It was an undisclosed meeting in Trump Tower between Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, then campaign manager Paul Manafort, and a curious guest, Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. And today, the Senate Judiciary Committee released thousands of pages of documents providing the most comprehensive look at that meeting. It was set up by Rob Goldstone, a British music publicist. Goldstone had emailed Trump Jr. he had dirt on Hillary Clinton that was, quote, part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump. Trump Jr. replied, "If it's what you say, I love it." And he later told the committee, "I had no way of assessing where it came from, but I was willing to listen," and he expected incriminating information. The same day Trump Jr. set up the meeting, his father promised to soon reveal new revelations.
We're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
But Trump Jr. told the committee he didn't inform his father about the meeting, quote, because I wouldn't bring him anything that's unsubstantiated before I knew what it was actually about myself. He said the same last summer and called the meeting a waste of time.
It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered it until you start scouring through the stuff. It was literally just a wasted 20 minutes, which was a shame.
Last summer, when the meeting was first revealed, Trump Jr. released a statement that initially concealed the meeting's purpose. Asked by the committee whether President Trump helped edit the statement, Trump Jr. said the president, quote, may have commented through Hope Hicks, the then communications director. Today's revelations come 1 year after rapid-fire dramatic political developments. James Comey was fired as FBI director. 2 days later, President Trump said he'd fired Comey because of the Russia investigation.
And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election that they should have won.
Less than a week after that, 1 year ago tomorrow, Robert Mueller was named special counsel.
And that brings us to today, when the Senate Intelligence Committee confirmed the intelligence community's January 2017 conclusion that Russia tried to tip the election for Donald Trump. Today's findings refuted the House intelligence report that accused the intelligence community of significant intelligence tradecraft failings. Here to unpack where the investigation stands and what questions still remain, I'm joined by Garrett Graff, author of the book The Threat Matrix: Inside Robert Mueller's FBI and the War on Global Terror, and Matt Olsen. He's a former federal prosecutor who directed the National Counterterrorism Center under President Obama. Welcome to you both. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.
Matt Olsen, I want to start with you. This is now going on year number 2 of Robert Mueller's investigation. The president says that Robert Mueller has exceeded his remit. Has the special counsel exceeded his remit? And we are 1 year in. Why haven't we seen more conclusions?
Yeah, I don't think the special counsel has exceeded the remit or scope of the investigation. If you look back at the document that set this in motion, the Department of Justice authorized this special counsel to look at anything linked to the Russia meddling in our election from the campaign, as well as matters directly arising out of that investigation. So it's a broad scope. In addition, if you see what the special counsel has done, he has gone to the Eastern District of Virginia. The judge there has approved the Manafort investigation, and he's also referred matters out to other prosecutors' office, such as the investigation that's now in New York against Michael Cohen.
Garrett Graff, there are a lot of aspects to this investigation. Does Robert Mueller embrace the kind of unwieldy notion of this investigation, or did he expect something much more narrow?
Well, I think what we do see, as Matt said, is that all of this falls pretty clearly under one big umbrella, and that Mueller is being pretty careful trying to keep everything under the umbrella. That said, what it is clear is that there are a number of different arms of the investigation, or sort of aspects of the probe. You have information influence operations, you have active cyber penetrations, you have money laundering, and you have these suspicious Russian campaign contacts, as well as, of course, the big one that we're all wondering about, which is the president's obstruction of justice.
So, Matt Olsen, let's start with some of those, or let's go through each of those individually. And as you said, there's a specific language that Mueller was given, which is investigate any links or coordination between President Trump and the Russian effort to influence the election. The president says this is a witch hunt, and there's no quote-unquote collusion. Do we know that yet?
You know, I don't think we know yet. There's certainly, from my perspective, is evidence of collusion, or what you would consider to be coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. It's not hard to find that. You go back to the famed Trump Tower meeting in the summer of summer of 2016. There's clearly indications of coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia and their interference in our election. So what we do know, I think, is that the Mueller investigation, that team knows a lot that we don't know. And I say that because they've got 100 charges pending. They've charged 19 different individuals, and 3 individuals are cooperating, including Michael Flynn and George Papadopoulos, people connected to the campaign. So I think there are there's a lot of information that the Mueller team knows that we don't know yet.
Among those people who have been indicted, Garrett Graff, are former campaign chairman Paul Manafort. Rick Gates has pleaded guilty. This is a different aspect of the investigation. It's about financial issues. It's about lobbying and anti-corruption laws. So how important is that part of this investigation to the overall investigation?
We don't really know yet, and that's part of what makes this so interesting at this moment in the investigation. As Matt said we just don't know how all of these pieces fit together right now. We see a lot of pieces on the table. We see some money laundering. We see some coordination. We see some active cyber attacks and information operations, but we don't really know how they connect. How does the money laundering relate to WikiLeaks? How does it relate possibly to that Trump Tower meeting? And that's where, again, we think that Bob Mueller is very far ahead of our public understanding. Remember, we're just learning now about these AT&T and Novartis payments to Michael Cohen through Essential Consultants, LLC. Bob Mueller knew that information in November. So I think it's fair to think on almost all aspects of this investigation, Bob Mueller is 4 to 6 months ahead of the public understanding.
Another basket is obstruction, of course, and that's one of the things that a lot of people are talking about. I just want to show a tweet that President Trump put out. In defending himself, he says the Russia witch hunt is rapidly losing credibility. How about obstruction? There is no, capital O, obstruction. It's called fighting back. If the president is fighting back, Matt Olson, can that be obstruction?
Sure, the obstruction can be fighting back. Obstruction is corruptly trying to interfere or impede with a criminal investigation. So you can go back, for example, to the statement that the president made, according to Jim Comey, about Mike Flynn. Let this go. Let this thing against Flynn go. That certainly is evidence of obstruction. What we don't know is what was the intent of the president in making those statements. Was there corrupt intent behind that? That's something that's proven by usually by the circumstances surrounding a statement like that. You know, also just the firing of Comey himself also could be viewed as an effort to obstruct this investigation. The president's statement subsequently that it was to, you know, a part of the getting rid of the Russia probe. So again, speaking as a former federal prosecutor, those are the kinds of things I would be looking very closely at in order to show certainly evidence of obstruction.
Garrett Graff, Matt Olson, thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
The impoverished nation of Yemen stands on the brink of collapse with the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. 3/4 of its 29 million people need humanitarian assistance. There are 1 million suspected cases of cholera, and 10,000 people have died in a brutal 3-year-old civil war causing all the misery. On one side of the war, Shiite Houthi rebels, a religious minority in Yemen backed by Iran, who now control the capital, Sana'a, and the second-largest port city, Hodeidah. On the other side, the government forces of President Abdurrabbo Mansour Hadi and a coalition led by Saudi Arabia, which includes the United Arab Emirates and the United States. A Saudi-led air campaign has pounded Houthi strongholds in the north and cut off aid and food, driving many people south, homeless in their own land. Tonight, with the support of the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, special correspondent Marcia Biggs reports.
It's being called the Forgotten War. In Yemen, a country where access for journalists is limited and dangerous, the world's worst humanitarian crisis goes largely ignored. But after months of waiting, we were able to get permission to enter the country through the southern city of Aden, the new de facto capital of Yemen's government controlled by the Saudi-led coalition. We were hoping to get to areas under siege, but kept hitting a wall.
So it's incredibly difficult to access the northern Houthi-controlled areas to cover what's going on there. Even if you can secure permission from the Houthis, it's getting there that's the problem. The airport in Sana'a is shut. There is one flight from Djibouti for humanitarian staff, but the Saudis control who gets on that flight. And right now they're not giving permission to journalists. You could drive, but it's very dangerous, and there's no guarantee that you'll actually reach the destination, that you won't get turned around halfway there.
So we went to a village called Basatine on the outskirts of Aden to try to tell the story as best we could.
So since we can't get to the north to the Houthi-controlled areas, we're going to talk to some people that have recently arrived to find out what life is like there. Marhaba.
Living in this one room are Sawad, her 2 sons, and daughter-in-law. Sawad says she fled daily airstrikes near her home in Hodeidah 1 month ago, but the lack of food was worse than the bombs.
Life is difficult there. People are hungry. They're looking for water, looking for food, looking for work, but there is nothing. We would eat once a day. If we had breakfast, that's it for the day. If we had lunch, that's it for the day. Lots of diseases have spread there. Children are getting malaria, their platelets are low. They're very sick because of the lack of food.
Areas here in the south are, quote, liberated from Houthis and far from the front line. So people may be safe from the fighting, but they still face the daily threat of starvation.
Here in Aden, it's a big city. Food is available. The problem, the prices. We spoke to one shopkeeper who told me that a bag of flour 3 months ago cost $10. Now it costs $17.
But Sawad is living outside of Aden, where food and money are even harder to come by. She says her son makes around $3 a day as a laborer, but work is sporadic. When they have money, food is the first thing they try to find.
So there's some vegetables. في لحم? No meat. في خبز? No bread. Just the vegetables. ومين تلومني? يعني who do you blame?
God help us with this situation. We don't know who caused it or who to blame. They're both fighting, I don't know.
Yemen was already the poorest country in the Middle East before the war. But in 2015, Houthi rebels supported by Iran captured huge areas of the country. And the existing government made a deal with Saudi Arabia to fight the Houthis, driving them back north, where Saudi Arabia and a coalition which includes the United States has pounded the Houthis with bombs and tried to choke their supplies with a blockade. Amid international outrage, some U.S. lawmakers have sought to stop the flow of money and weapons to Saudi Arabia. But the Trump administration recently approved a deal to sell the Saudis $1.3 billion worth of weapons. Ahmed bin Ahmed al-Maisri is Yemen's interior minister, a cabinet member of embattled and exiled President Abdel Rabbu Mansour Hadi.
How does it make you feel that Yemeni people in the north are being bombed and are starving in the name of fighting the Houthis?
Is there a war in the world where people don't die? War is a disaster on all levels. We didn't start this war, we were dragged into it. They came, supported by Iran, to take over our identity and doctrine that we've had for 1,400 years. When war is imposed on you, you have to fight back.
But the cost of that fight is high.
So people are trying to set up home as best they can in the circumstance. You can see clothes hanging on the line. People are using these plastic sheets for a sense of privacy.
Shabi Amantu is with the United Nations Refugee Agency.
In the past 3 months alone, we've seen more than 100,000 people have to flee their homes.
This former vocational center outside of Aden is now home for displaced Yemenis, and 33 families are crammed in this building, having just arrived from the front line.
Missiles hit our house and it was totally destroyed. The bathroom was the only place left standing.
17-year-old Rosela fled with her elderly aunt, with only the clothes on their backs. They had to leave her mother and father behind.
I'm very worried about them, and I call them when I can. If we find something, at least if we find mattresses, we will stay.
You're not just dealing with displacement, we're also dealing with an active conflict zone. It makes getting assistance to them quite challenging.
You're struggling to keep up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look at the numbers, 22 million people in need, and humanitarian assistance is only finite. It requires more than a humanitarian solution. It's caused by a political problem, and the solution to that is peace.
27-year-old El Sam is the wife of a fisherman from Yemen's western coast.
We ate once a day. We were under siege. We could not get anything. All we had was what we could catch in the sea.
But they're now living 20 miles inland, so supporting the family is difficult, especially with a daughter coping with epilepsy.
We have to drive 2 hours now to bring her seizure medicine. It's not available around here. We try our best to provide the medicine for her every 10 days, but it's very expensive.
For those most vulnerable, it's hardship after hardship. Yemen has historically imported 90% of its food, so restrictions on imports are a huge blow. Fuel shortages, inflation, and rising unemployment are crippling the country.
So we're dealing with a situation in Yemen where you've got state services that are now on the brink of collapse. The health system is really buckling. Families are struggling to make the choice of deciding which child to feed, which child to send to hospital. I mean, these are really heartbreaking decisions, but this is what life is like for civilians now impacted by war in Yemen.
Here in this small regional hospital in Lahish province, just north of Aden, Dr. Marwa Gamal says she sees around a dozen children per month with severe acute malnutrition, all of them with complications. 10-month-old Mohammed was already malnourished when he contracted measles and bronchopneumonia. His mother said when she brought him in, she thought he was dying. His eyes were closed and he wasn't breathing, she says.
Is the biggest problem malnutrition or disease?
Disease. Malnutrition is controllable if there are no complications, but when they come with diseases, this is much worse. There are cases that died. We could not help them because they came too late. They died because of complications.
Like many public sector employees, Dr. Gamal continues to work despite an intermittent salary.
I love my work. This hospital is in my village. If I don't help my own people, who am I going to help?
Are you concerned about what will happen when they leave?
Yes, of course.
I'm worried that the children will get worse or get sick again if the parents don't follow the proper course of treatment.
A cycle of displacement, malnutrition, and disease brought on not by famine or natural disaster, but by man.
Is there a point when you would say, enough? Yemeni people are suffering. We have to find another way.
War will not end until its mission ends, and in the past 3 years we paid a lot. There is still a little bit left to pay, and we have to pay it, so that the bill is completed and the mission is done. The blood we lost can't go for nothing. To let this blood go in vain and surrender means we've neither achieved the mission nor saved lives. They should never have started it, but now we're on this journey, and we have to finish it.
We were poor before the war, one woman told me, but the war just finished us. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Marcia Biggs in Aden and Lahej, Yemen.
And Marcia Biggs will be back tomorrow with the next part of her series, Inside Yemen. Voters in 4 states went to the polls yesterday to pick Republican and Democratic Party nominees ahead of November's midterm elections. Lisa Desjardins reports.
Last night's primaries spanned the country and the political spectrum, from more liberal Oregon to conservative Idaho and Nebraska to swing state Pennsylvania. And a clear theme: wins by women in competitive congressional races, from environmental planner Jamie McLeod Skinner in Oregon to Nebraska and nonprofit executive Kara Eastman, who pulled off an upset over a more moderate Democrat. Nowhere felt the so-called pink wave more than Pennsylvania, which currently has no women in Congress. That will change next year. Last night, 1 Republican and 7 Democratic women won their primaries there, setting up one race where both candidates are women. Among the Pennsylvania winners, Democrat Susan Wild, the progressive solicitor of Allentown.
This isn't just for me. This isn't just for the next generation. This is for women who have been waiting a long time to have an equal voice in our government. And I want to be part of the group that does that.
To take a closer look at the results, I'm joined by Dave Davies. He's a senior reporter at PBS station WHYY in Philadelphia. Dave, let me ask you, you've been covering politics for 30 years. What did primary voters tell us last night?
Well, I think in Pennsylvania, they told us that they're ready for a change. But, you know, the biggest changes really, Lisa, are the changes in the playing field in Pennsylvania. If you look in the Philly area, I mean, 3 things happened. One, there is a surge of activity among progressive Democrats, a lot of them women who ran for office and contributed to candidates. Second, this is a seismic shift. The state Supreme Court redrew all of the congressional boundaries, regarded them as gerrymandered in favor of Republicans, and the new boundaries drawn by a court of justices largely elected as Democrats in partisan races created districts more favorable to Democrats. Third thing, 3 Republican representatives decided not to run again. So you had more Democrat-friendly districts and no Republican incumbents. That was attractive to a lot of Democratic women in particular, and they got in and really performed yesterday.
Trying to get to a national summary here, Democrats are hoping that those open seats in Pennsylvania are one of the ways they're going to take over the House. But yet, if more progressive candidates, as we saw last night, are winning, what is your take? Are those progressive candidates more or less likely to help Democrats in the fall?
Well, I think because the seats have been rearranged, I think at least 3 of the progressive Democrats who won yesterday are very likely to win their elections in the fall, and that would result in a net gain of 2 seats for the Pennsylvania delegation for the Democrats. I think they have a very real shot at 3 more, and that could mean that Pennsylvania could contribute 5 seats to a pretty good head start for the Democrats to try and retake the House.
As we saw some progressive Democrats win last night, also a conservative Republican, Lou Barletta, in the Senate race, won that Republican primary. What do you make of the dynamics there How much is President Trump going to be a factor in Pennsylvania's Senate race?
He is going to be a factor. I mean, Lou Barletta, who is a congressman from eastern Pennsylvania, he championed cracking down on immigrants when he was the mayor of a town called Hazleton. That's how he became well known. In Congress, he is among the earliest and most vocal supporters of President Trump. So President Trump's going to be a big factor in that race no matter what happens. Barletta is going to be taking on a two-term incumbent, Bob Casey, a Democrat who's not exactly in Mr. Excitement, but he comes from a well-known family name. So I think Trump's going to be a big issue in that race in the fall.
6 months to go. You have a very interesting state. We have an interesting midterm election nationally. We'll keep checking back with you. Dave Davies of WHYY, thank you.
Good to be with you.
Facebook is under pressure to crack down on false news, fake accounts, and inflammatory content that can be manipulated to influence the public. This week, the social media giant announced that it deleted 865 million posts in the first 3 months of this year. Most of it was spam. The company also quickly disabled more than 500 million fake accounts. But that isn't everything. Tonight, we take a look at how Facebook tries to tackle the content it won't delete. Miles O'Brien has been examining the problem of junk news and Facebook. For the record, the NewsHour has partnered with Facebook on projects in the past. This is the last report in a special series that's part of our weekly look at the leading edge of science and technology.
Inside Facebook headquarters in Silicon Valley, they're trying to rethink the column of babble that the newsfeed has become.
So I don't think this is actually necessarily all that bad of a design, even though it doesn't look that great.
Here, they are trying to figure out how to rate the quality of the news we like and share, more clearly identify the source, offer users some context, and make sure the cream rises to the top of the feed while the junk sits at the bottom.
We don't want a false story to get distribution, so we demote it.
Tessa Lyons is product manager of Newsfeed Integrity. She works with two competing goals in mind: keep the platform free and open to a broad spectrum of ideas and opinions, and reduce the spread of misinformation.
Why not just delete it?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I think, look, there's real tension here. We believe that we're not arbiters of truth and that people don't want us to be arbiters of truth. And we also believe that censoring and fully removing information unless it violates our community standards is not the expectation from our community. So we work to reduce the damage that it can do and ensure that when it is seen, it's surrounded by additional context.
Even though nearly half of all Americans now get their news from Facebook, the company insists it is a technology enterprise, not in the business of making editorial judgments. So they are outsourcing the work. The most clear-cut problem, content that is demonstrably false. To grapple with that, they have turned to 20 third-party fact-checkers globally, including one of the Internet's original arbiters of fact from fiction, Snopes.com. We caught up with managing editor Brooke Binkowski, a former newspaper and radio reporter. She works at home and at a neighborhood coffee shop in San Diego.
And is this a typical day? Busy day? Yeah. Okay.
This is a busier than normal day, but lately...
Facebook reached out to Snopes to be among its outside fact-checkers in 2016.
It's gone from probably 8-hour days for all of us to more like 12, 15-hour days now, because there's just so much to tackle, and we all are true believers, basically. We all think that it's important what we're doing.
Facebook says when a story is debunked by fact-checkers, it reduces its reach by 80%. But Binkowski remains skeptical.
I still am not convinced that it's making a huge difference.
Part of the problem? Old-fashioned shoe leather reporting, making calls to sources, doing the research, sometimes even taking a trip to a real library, takes time.
Mark Twain famously said, "What is it? A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes." I think it's gotten so bad now that a lie can travel like 3 times around the world, completely change, affect the perspectives and the votes of thousands of people, and wreak havoc all over the place while the truth is still kind of getting out of bed. It's just happened much faster, and it's overwhelming.
At Facebook, they are keenly aware of this, but they see no easy fix, either from humans or machines.
Is it possible to match the rate at which people use the product?
If we're always waiting for individual facts to be reviewed, that's going to be slow in each case. But by working with the fact checkers, if we're able to understand the pages, the domains who repeatedly spread this type of information, then there's more work that we can do upstream to stop it earlier.
They are also looking upstream for spammers who create content that is factually correct, but misleading, incomplete, or polarizing. It's often called clickbait. To try and defend against this, Facebook is using an artificial intelligence technique called machine learning classification. The idea? Feed the computer reams of clickbait examples so it can find patterns and learn how to spot this material and send it to the bottom of the newsfeed.
So with artificial intelligence, you can make the algorithm smart enough to identify what is clickbait from a spammer.
This is using a machine learning classifier in order to help us scale this problem, because at 2 billion people, we want to ensure that our solutions don't require individual manual review, but rather that they can scale across the platform.
Producer Cameron Hickey has been developing his own tool to identify the junk as part of our reporting. In doing so, he has seen the limits of machine learning and the persistence of the adversary.
Using software to recognize patterns and then do something based on those patterns that you recognize is only as good as the pattern remaining consistent. And the whole point of this problem is that the people who are trying to publish content like this, they're adaptive, right? So as soon as you shut down one avenue, they move to another avenue.
Historically, junk news producers have taken advantage of the fact that most everything that appears in the Facebook newsfeed looks the same, whether it's heavily researched and vetted journalism or pure junk. In the days when we bought newspapers and magazines at newsstands or supermarkets, it was easier to identify the difference between quality and junk.
This is our user experience labs.
Facebook is developing ways to give its users some clues in labs like this one.
So what's going to happen is there's going to be red dots that pop up on the screen. I just want you to follow them with your eyes.
Grace Jackson is a quantitative user experience researcher at Facebook. She is showing me how she tracks eye movements as a user reads a newsfeed. She's testing to see how easily I recognize visual cues that an article has been fact-checked or links are added for context.
I blew by it,
I
think you need a little more there.
This was our original design that we had tested and learned that a lot of people skipped right over it and never saw the entry point over here.
Well, it's not obvious that's a click point, right?
Exactly.
The eye-tracking data helps product designer Jeff Smith as he ponders new ways to give users clues about the credibility of information.
We're in this new space and age where we're trying to design for new mechanisms that give people those credibility cues that used to be there via the publisher on the supermarket aisle or the newsstand.
He's working on a design that more clearly identifies articles that have been debunked, provides context, related articles, and information about the publisher.
I'm trying to give the user as much information as possible in a way that they can easily sort of digest and understand without getting in the way.
The Facebook newsfeed algorithm is finely tuned to hold our attention, originally without an emphasis on the quality of the content. But the company says it is trying to change that.
We want to make sure that the news people see is high quality, and we didn't have that stance before, and so it's a pretty radical departure in terms of the way that we've been thinking about news, and I think a really worthwhile one.
Alex Hardiman is the director of products for news. She is leading Facebook's effort to identify news sources that are credible, trustworthy, and authentic. They are turning to their users for the answer, asking them to rate news sources they trust, and feeding those rankings into the newsfeed algorithm to determine what sources should rise to the top.
With so many people getting their news from Facebook, why don't you have a newsroom?
Because for us, thinking through what quality means doesn't require us to have a newsroom. We're really trying to make sure that we pull in great information from publishers and from the people who use Facebook to make these decisions.
But if given the choice, will users of Facebook choose quality over junk? The hyper-partisan content publisher we found in California, Cyrus Masumi, is skeptical.
they aren't New York Times readers necessarily. Like maybe some of them are, but the majority of them just want a 250 to 350 word article, which will sort of like, you know, get them a little bit fired up.
And the numbers back him up. His Truth Examiner page has 3.8 million fans, and the stories he publishes generate a much higher rate of likes and shares than the New York Times and the Washington Post.
Nobody wants to read that stuff when they're on their phone, which is what everybody's doing when they're on Facebook. Like nobody pulls out their phone like and goes like, aha, like I'd love to read this 5,000 word profile of like the endangered giraffe in like, you know, the Congo.
As long as users continue to like and share junk news, should Facebook redefine its role as a publisher?
I think that they really need to come to terms with the fact that they are a media company on top of everything else, because right now they keep saying they're tech, they're tech, they're tech. They're trying to avoid it all coming crashing down when they finally say we're media, because then all those questions will come. Well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do it that way? Why didn't you listen to this?
Is it time for the company to take a little more responsibility about what is in the news feed, what is on the trending stories, in an active editorial way?
I say absolutely yes to responsibility. The tactics as to whether or not active editorial way, I would say we don't know. So the first part, yes, we have a responsibility to making sure that the news people see on Facebook is high quality.
The problem is far from solved, and the 2018 midterm elections are looming. Even as the political races heat up, here at Facebook, they are running their own race with no finish line in sight. I'm Miles O'Brien for the PBS NewsHour in Menlo Park, California.
Fascinating, and you can watch all of the stories in Miles' series about junk news online at pbs.org/newshour. And now to our NewsHour share, something interesting that caught our eye. Yanni versus Laurel. It is the auditory debate taking the internet by storm today. NewsHour's Sikan Akpan and Julia Griffin explain how one sound can create two different experiences.
The internet has been set ablaze over one sound and two words.
Laurel. Laurel. Laurel.
So which did you hear, Yanni or Laurel?
This audio clip, which first went viral on Reddit and then Twitter, features a robotic voice saying a specific word, but people's perceptions of that word differ dramatically, even in the NewsHour office.
Yanni.
Laurel.
Yanni.
Yanni.
Laurel.
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 How is it possible people are hearing different things? The sound is what's called an ambiguity illusion, and it's nothing new to neuroscientists.
Remember The Dress from 2015? Some people swore it was gold and white, others black and blue. That viral photo is a visual version of an ambiguity illusion.
When a human brain encounters something it can't immediately understand, it tries to fill in the gaps.
In the case of Yanni v. Laurel, the frequency or pitch of the sound clip is cryptic to our minds. The original poster of the audio clip, an 18-year-old Reddit user from Lawrenceville, Georgia, recorded the pronunciation of Laurel off vocabulary.com through his speakers. That distorted the sound.
This muddled sound causes our brains to fall back on their natural preferences.
Folks who prefer lower frequencies hear Laurel, while those who lean toward high frequencies hear Yanni.
This might explain why children are reportedly hearing Yanni. The human ability to hear higher frequencies fades with age.
Your speakers or headphones may also be to blame, as some sound systems are tuned to emphasize different frequencies.
People discussing the sound around you can also shift your mind's perception.
Ambiguity illusions typically cause our perceptions to land one way or the other.
Yanni, Laurel, and The Dress stand out because they clearly split a room.
But the neurological basis for exactly why is still a mystery to scientists. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Julia Griffin.
And I'm Sikan Akpan.
And I don't know what the fuss is all about. It's Laurel. And that's the NewsHour for tonight. On Thursday, we continue our series Inside Yemen with a focus on the healthcare crisis in that war-torn nation. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and here again tomorrow evening. For all of us, the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
watching PBS.